So Transcending Trauma was really, a book for therapists to learn about IFS, to learn about the integration of neuroscience and the treatment of complex PTSD. Some uh, clients certainly bought the book and learned a lot from it, but it was primarily for people in the field, right? This is a general public offering. One of my passions, my purpose, I would say, not passion and purpose, let's put it that way, is to bring trauma healing to the world. And this is my first offering in that way, is writing a memoir, telling my personal trauma history, telling my trauma story around healing, showing the world that healing is possible. So this is for the general public, and it's a whole new thing.
Whole new world. So we're just jumping in, Frank. I just said I'm just going to start recording it because we started talking and sharing good stuff and just jumped right in. So I today am with Frank Anderson. This is your third time on the podcast, and Frank has a new book coming out called To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. And it is different than anything he's written before. And it's getting a widespread notice, not just in the little IFS community. It's getting worldwide. He is going to be on Good Morning America.
Yeah. And you know what else? I'll share you one other thing. And who knows how and when this is going to happen, but I already have a screenwriter, a producer, and a director who's interested in turning it into a movie adaptation. So I'm thrilled. They say 70% of movies, never 70% don't make it to the screen. The producer that I'm working with said, I don't take on projects that don't make it to the screen. I was like, okay then, okay then. So we'll see what happens. But it for me, it's around getting this message to the world. And that's another medium to bring the message to the world if it becomes a movie adaptation to the book.
Right. Did you ever imagine that your impact wouldn't be this? I mean, you do have a head impact, a brainy, a smart guy impact, which you talk about in the book, right? You sort of, but did you ever imagine that actually your bigger impact would be a personal, emotional, vulnerable story?
I didn't imagine that ever, and I absolutely love that. Right? Like I was always smart. Like that's who I was. I'll never forget the last weekend of my level 1 training with Tony Herbine Blank. She was a level 1 trainer at the time. And we always had these like graduation kind of ceremonies. You had to do a skit. It was a whole thing. It was very different back in the day. And in the last weekend of my level 1 training, I realized that smart wasn't who I was. It was the first time smart separated from me, right? It was the first time it unblended. And it was like this crisis, like it was like this identity crisis, like, who the hell am I if I'm not smart? Because it was my whole life, like what I did to be loved was to achieve and become smart, right? And so it was really a moment. And so to be here now, some 20 years later, to be kind of known for my heart, to be known for being vulnerable, to teach healing through that dimension is like amazing. That's amazing. Like never did I think that would be possible. Like I didn't cry. I didn't shed one tear in 11 years of 5-time-a-week therapy during my residency. Okay. So I was so cut off. I was so disconnected. So to kind of be known for being vulnerable and sharing my heart is like home run.
I love that. And I love that that smart also was super. Not only did it help you be loved, but it kept you safe.
Yeah. and it didn't help me get the love I wanted, by the way. It was my best attempt at it, right?
Yeah.
You know,
There was
it
sort of
just,
part of me was sort of every time sort of a little
yeah.
disappointed, like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that didn't work. I was hoping it was going to
Yeah,
work.
yes, that's exactly right. So it was a really noble attempt. It never really worked. So yeah, it was, to be well, and this is such a cliche, Tammy, but it's really true. It's like I don't I have love now from people in a way that I never have before. But really, kind of in that cliche way, more importantly, like I truly do love myself. Like I spent many, many years being wrong and bad and abnormal,
Yeah.
insecure. And
Yeah.
so now it's like if you don't love me, that's really okay. Like that's you. That's not me. Like I'm good. I'm I,
Mm,
I do love myself now
mm,
after so
mm.
many years. So I feel really good about myself, and it's okay if you don't.
Hmm.
Oh,
Well, you talk about, I think you actually talked about this in one of the podcasts we did about being a little boy and being
yeah,
taken to therapy and this and never really understanding why. So at 6 years old, you got
yeah,
this message so early on that
yeah,
something's wrong with me. I'm not really sure what it is, but clearly
right.
there's something really wrong with me.
100%. 100%. That's the way this, I knew this when they said write a memoir. I was like, that's kind of crazy. But when they said it, I was like, all right. And I knew the opening line was like, Frankie, you're not going to school today. I just knew,
Mm,
I knew that's the way the book was going to start. I was sent to psych testing. It turned out to be the same institution in downtown Chicago that I went to medical school. It was like such a full circle moment. My mom was like, when I got accepted to medical school, oh, Frankie, isn't this funny? This is where you had psych testing. And I was like, oh, I don't remember that. Like I blocked it all out. So,
wow. You're like,
I,
yeah, that is funny, mom.
yeah, so funny, right? But I really did. I talk about, I went to therapy starting at 6 for 6 years, once a week. It was a form of conversion therapy, we know now. And I have two memories in 6 years.
Mm,
Two memories. Like that's how powerfully I can't believe it. Like still to this day, Tammy, I was like, how could I remember the waiting room. I remember the woman sitting in the waiting room. I remember her needle, did a needlepoint of a mouse for me, and I remember all these details, but in the room,
mm,
his desk was off limits. I drew a picture of my family and I played with army men and battleships on the floor. That's what I remember. So there
mm,
was so much going on that I repressed, so much, coercion. Don't play with these toys, play with these toys. I don't think I was physically abused in that office. I don't think I was sexually abused in that office. I really don't have those kind of feelings, but I have no access, which just
mm.
me away. So I learned how to disconnect. I was a
Yeah.
good student even back
Yes.
then, right?
Right.
I was a
Right.
good student even back then. I really disconnected from myself, from who I was in order to fit into the world. I really did.
Mm, mm. And do you think that when we have parts that do us, like do that to us, parts that disconnect us that extremely? I mean, I know
Yeah.
you're going to answer this question, but I know you're going to answer it this certain way. But
Yeah.
okay, let me ask it this way: How does that impact our ability to love ourselves
I
or to
didn't,
not love ourselves?
yeah,
That disconnection,
I didn't have access to love.
right?
I didn't have access to love myself I mean, I'll say this. I knew my mother loved me. Like I just had a huge healing experience with my mother yesterday 2 days ago while I was in Chicago filming a TV show and visiting her. She doesn't want to read the book. Like it's too painful for her.
Okay.
And I had this huge healing experience for both of us. For both of us. It was the first time she said, yes, you were hurt. And no, I didn't protect you. And I'm sorry. It's the first time that ever happened in my life 2 days ago. Like, was huge, huge.
Wow.
It was incredible, incredible. She's going to read the book now after we kind of had this thing together. It's like,
Holy cow.
she couldn't need my father and acknowledge what he was doing to me. And I said that to her. I said, Mom, is there a way that you could love him and acknowledge that I was hurt? Like, could you hold those two? And, she did. She was able to get there. She was able to get there because she loved me. Like, I felt, even though she wasn't strong enough to protect me, I felt her love. So I knew my mom loved me. Like, I felt that, and that saved my life, I think. I really do, but I couldn't love anybody. And I married a woman who was a friend. I was a friend, I couldn't love her. I wasn't that capable. I couldn't love myself for sure,
Well,
so
and you didn't really know what that meant, right? And we sort of
no.
just even the idea of love, like what does that even mean? But I think that you're like what love meant for you or what your experience of love, what like you had a different
Yeah.
experience of love than you do now.
100%. It was one of the things they say in the book is like it was two-dimensional, and then it became three-dimensional multicolored. Like, and that's what it was like. It was just like this black and white thing, it's like, oh, because I looked at people, I would observe, oh, men act like this. This is what men are supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to treat a woman. You're supposed to get married. Like, so I was observant, and I did, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is what love is, and so okay, so now you get married. It's like marching through the steps, but not feeling
Right.
anything, not feeling anything. And it was, it really was like being able to love. And the first guy I was with after I came out, I was in love with him. It was a toxic relationship in a lot of ways, but I really was in love. And I was like, holy cow,
Totally
like,
different. Yeah.
unbelievable
Mm.
experience that compared to that.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between sex and love is like so dramatic for me now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So dramatic. So dramatic. Yeah.
Hmm. I want to talk about, so we're just going to throw out these words that have so much
Yeah.
meaning to them. So we're talking about love. Can we talk about forgiveness?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
this was not what I was expecting at all. And I teach differently now as a result of this experience with my dad and my mom, as I just told you recently. I think forgiveness is a whole separate dimension of healing trauma. And I split them apart now as a result of what I went through. And I still believe that forgiveness is a choice. I don't think people have to. You don't want to, you don't. I do believe that healing trauma is about releasing what you absorbed as a result of some event or some experience. So healing trauma is releasing what doesn't belong to you and no longer serves you. All the thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations around that. So I think healing is necessary first
Mm.
before you can choose to repair the relational aspect between you and the person who harmed you. So I think it's a whole separate thing now in a way that I didn't before, because I healed a lot of my trauma. I did. And I did it in isolation, not with my parents. And I felt really good. And I had a great relationship, and I had a family, and I had kids, and I had a successful career. So a lot happened in my life from healing trauma. It can be done in isolation. The piece of around forgiveness and the relational repair was a shock to me. And, it was a gift because I didn't expect it. I never thought I didn't even know what that meant, but I was able to love and have compassion for someone who harmed me significantly.
Mm.
And when I started feeling forgiveness, did it benefit my father? Probably, but he was kind of even unconscious at the time, and kind of, and in his transition, I don't even know how much my ability to forgive him impacted him. I'm sure on some energetic level it did. More importantly, it impacted me because I was freed up from all that I was carrying about our relationship, and I remember kind of organizing the funeral for him, and I knew I would. I just knew it. I don't know why I knew it, but I knew it. And I wanted to give him a good send-off, and I felt love for him, which was so freeing. Like, and I thought, I went for a run when I was in Chicago organizing the funeral. It's like, there's nothing more powerful than to loving someone who has harmed you. It is the ultimate release of your trauma. It's the ultimate release of your trauma. When you can love someone and they have harmed you, you are clearly no longer tethered by the trauma. The trauma is no longer tethered to you or to you in relationship to this person. So it was like a revelation for me. It's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I could feel that. Like, it was so empowering. It was so empowering. And then I was like, as if that's not enough, right? Like, then I started forgiving myself. That was the other surprise for me. It's like, oh my goodness, like, I saw the humanity in my dad. I saw the complexity in him. And then I started having room to forgive me for all that I did. How are we really supposed to forgive somebody else? How are we supposed to forgive ourselves if we can't forgive somebody else? Honestly. And it was through that process that I was like, he's complicated. He's fallible. He's human. He wanted to be loved, and so am I. And so it opened this door for me to be like, I'm sorry I hurt you. I am sorry I did the best I could and I made a mistake. It allowed me to genuinely feel sorry for what I did, take responsibility for what I did. And I got this message from my parts, Tammy. It was like, and I'm sorry for staying too long in relationships that weren't healthy for me. Like, my parts needed me to apologize to them for what I had done to myself. I tolerated too much and stayed too long in relationships that weren't good. And so there was this self-forgiveness piece that was like, again, I was so fortunate because the last 4 chapters of the book were written in real time. Like, my life unfolded in support of the memoir as opposed to the other way around. So it was happening in real time. I did so much more healing through the process of writing this book than I ever thought possible in all my years of therapy, honestly.
Mm. So we can talk about writing. So I think that might be helpful for people, about writing as part of their healing journey. But what's really standing out, 2 things are standing out to me.
Yeah.
That forgiveness and repair, well, let me say it this way. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation.
Yeah.
So I think that do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the work of Desmond Tutu. He writes a book with his daughter around this, and I really resonate with him and agree with that. I think it's even ridiculous that I'm saying I agree with Desmond Tutu. Like, who the hell are you, Frank? You agree with Desmond Tutu? Good for you, buddy. But I really resonate with it, having gone through this experience of, like, forgiveness is about releasing what you're carrying about the other. Reconciliation is a choice between 2 people, and it requires 2 people being willing to create something new together. this is what I think about reconciliation. And I do this in my work when working with couples who have infidelity. It's like, no, you're not going to go back to what it was before the affair. That wasn't working, right? Like you're creating something new. And I feel the same is true with reconciliation. If both people are interested and capable, then you create something new if you choose to or not. And that's what's happening with my mom and I right now. You know, my mom and I have had a really powerful process together. And I apologize to her. I'm like, I'm sorry this book is hurting you. I had no intention. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm telling my life story and I can't do it taking you and dad out of this. And I know this is affecting you and I'm terribly sorry about that. You know, and it's not my intention. So her and I are creating something new together, you know, based on our history, which was complicated. I write in the book, I'm like, my dad's relationship was a little bit simpler. It was like, he hated me. I was terrified of him. I know the rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. You know,
Yeah.
my mom's was much more complicated.
Yeah.
And so her and I are navigating this new world without my father in it for either one of us. And so that's what reconciliation is. It's like, and it does, for me, it requires two people.
I love that. I am curious about your siblings and how
Yeah.
they're doing. And is there anything you want to share about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's complicated. Boy, you know, nobody told me writing a memoir would really affect the family. I mean, I kind of knew it. Like my cousins, who I've been very close to, I have many cousins, big Italian families. You know, I grew up with big, big parties, big Italian families. My cousins have been surprising because they all feel so bad because they didn't know any of this was happening. Like all of this abuse was happening behind closed doors. We always put on a happy face as soon as that door opened. When people walked into that house, we knew how to present well. So it's interesting to hear my cousins like, I loved your father. We wanted to be your family. You guys were the perfect family. And oh, Frankie, I had no idea this was happening. So it's been interesting to hear them. And that felt good that, like, you know, they didn't know. How would they know, right? With my brother, who's so traumatically bonded, him and I like went through so much together, 20 months apart. He was like, you know, I talked about him, like him and I sexually playing, exploring in the bathtub as a little kid. Like I put everything out there in this book, right? And he's like, it was all true, Frank. I remember everything. And everything you're saying was true. It's like, it was all true. So for him, it was powerful to bring back all these details. He's like, you remembered things I don't remember. But as I read it, it's all true. It all happened, you know? And so that was like powerful to be affirmed by him, my like co-trauma survivor, so to speak, you know?
Well, especially if there's a family, which so many families have this of don't tell. So it doesn't matter
Yeah,
whether it's true, you still don't tell.
yeah, it doesn't exist in
Yeah.
a way. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist, right?
Yeah.
Which is what my mom did for many, many years. That's
Yeah.
not true. That's not true. So my brother, I think it was helpful for him.
And especially
Yeah,
for him to say it's true, right? How validating it was for him
yeah,
to, and for you to be like, I'm putting this out there. I'm also putting
yeah,
your secrets out there.
yeah, yeah. And he didn't care at all. He told my mom and my sisters, if Frank takes out all the stuff that everybody's ashamed of, he ain't going to have a book. Like he's like, this is going to be less than half of a book in there. Like it's his story to tell, and he should be able to tell his story. You know,
Wow.
so he was,
Wow.
you know, he was so supportive of it, and because it was true, like it's like because it was true, like he's like he's not lying, he's not
Mm,
making anything up here, you
mm,
know.
mm-hmm.
My sisters were different. This, you know, they were 6 and 7 years younger than me, and they kind of grew up in a different family.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when I had gone into therapy, there was a no hitting rule.
Yeah.
No more hitting, no more hitting. You get grounded now. So my sisters didn't experience the same kind of violence really that I did growing
Yeah.
up. And so they were both kind of shocked too. Like,
Mm,
I didn't know. And they're
mm,
fully believing it. Is that what happened? Is that our father? Is that our mother? You know what I mean? That wasn't my
Wow.
mother, so they're struggling with it, which I can appreciate.
How was
You
that
know,
for you?
I don't want to harm them. I'm not interested in causing harm to anybody. I changed the names, I changed details. I did the best I could to protect everybody within the story. Honestly, and I said this to my mom, this is one of the things I said to my mom. I've chosen other people over me my whole life. I chose myself when I came out, and I'm actually choosing myself again now by telling this story. So if it affects you negatively, I'm sorry. And I feel bad for that, but I'm not going to change my truth in support of your feelings anymore. I'm sorry. So I feel bad. Like I can tolerate their pain or their disappointment. My mom was like, I'm so angry at you. And I'm like, I understand that. I get that you're angry. I get it. And I'm not going to sacrifice myself anymore.
Well, you must, I mean, this really speaks to your healing work, right? That
Yeah.
like so many of us, if our mom says that, then all of my
Right.
little parts are going to be freaking out. Like,
Right.
and then my
Right.
other parts are going to be like, what do we need? Damage control, damage control.
Yeah. I'll tell you. So I went Monday night, filmed this show Tuesday morning. We had this discussion Tuesday night and Wednesday morning before I left. Monday night, I was like, it crept back in, Tammy. I'm like, Frank, you are horrible. Look what you're doing to your mother. You are a selfish, horrible person, right? Like it popped right in. I was like, what is wrong with you? And then it didn't last very long.
Hmm.
No, I'm not horrible.
What did you have to do with that part? The part that popped in?
I just acknowledged it. It didn't take me over like it used to fully take me over. It showed up, but there
Hmm.
was enough of me around
Hmm.
that I was like, I get that you feel that way, but that's not actually what's happening. I wrote
Hmm.
out of love, and I wrote this to help people heal, right?
Hmm.
And part of it, and I know you can kind of get this because you go spiritually, part of it isn't even my story. It's
Hmm.
not me. This isn't about Frank Anderson. It is not about Frank Anderson. This is a bigger purpose for people to heal.
Hmm.
So you don't have to feel bad part that you're a bad person doing something bad, because that's not what this is about. I was up for about 4 months straight, 3 o'clock in the morning, every morning, writing, 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 writing. I couldn't sleep. And, this stuff was pouring through me. I would write, Tammy, I'd be like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, wow, where's that come from? Like, I was really writing like that. Like, it was just pouring,
Downloading. Yeah. Yeah.
downloading. And so I didn't do this to anybody. I didn't do this to anybody. I'm a channel who did this for people,
Hmm.
not to people. So I didn't hold it so strongly. It didn't have the weight that it did once upon a time. I'm like, but that's not really what this is. And this isn't mine. It's to help people. This is larger than me. I'm using my story to help other people heal. And my mom heard that. Why would you do this, Frankie? Why would you do this? I said, I'm doing it to help people, Mom. And I couldn't have done it without the things I went through with you and Dad. So thank you.
I love that. I love that because it becomes, yes, this is Frank's story, but it really is not that. It
No.
is that and it's not that.
Yeah, it's not about it's not, it is my story, and it's not about me. That's the way I
Yes.
say it. It is my story, and this is not about me, because I the stuff that I put in this book, I'm like, anybody who's I've ever seen for therapy now knows more about me than I know about them. like I put everything in there, you know, cruising in bathrooms, cheating on my wife, hitting and yelling at my kids, you know, not hitting once, yelling at my kids. Like I, I put everything in here, and I didn't plan on doing that. Like that was not my plan, is to be that exposed. But it was this, like, we've all been harmed. We all harm. And people need to know that. And my story is going to show that. Right. So, yeah, it wasn't what I was planning to do, but it's apparently what was in the cards. And I'll see how the world reacts. Right. I don't know how people, what I do know is the people that have read it so far, you know, people who have endorsed it, it's had a profound impact on them. And that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
If it
Yeah.
can activate you in your history and make you think about your life, then it's been a success.
Yeah. Yeah. Has Dick read it, and what did he think? What has he said? What has he said?
Dick read it. Dick endorsed it. I'm really grateful to him. You know, the thing he said that was the most touching to me was when people reach the kind of status that Frank Anderson has reached, they usually live off of their accolades and their successes. And that is not what Frank Anderson is doing here in his brutally honest account of his trauma and what he's been through, to show people that healing is possible. So it was just it was a beautiful, you know, acknowledgement of who I am as a person, you know.
And also the other choices you could have made, right? You could have made, like, yes, I'm Frank Anderson and I'm just getting more and more famous.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah.
And
right.
That's not, you're sort of going to be more and more famous for a different reason, though.
Very different reason for being human. Like, hello, for being 100% human and admitting that. I'm okay to be famous for that. Like, that'll work for me.
Yeah, I love that. Frank, I loved, well, there's two things I want to say before we go. We'll end on something fun, but I love you write in early on, you write this term, which I absolutely loved, the moments that made me. And tell me about that term, that phrase.
Yeah. It's interesting you picked that up, because the night before I met with the publisher, I had a dream. And I didn't know what the hell the dream was. It wasn't a dream. It was message. And it just repeated the moments that made me, the moments that made me. And I was like, I woke up, I was like, I don't know, what's that? And then I have a meeting. And this was like really 3 months after Transcending Trauma came out. They're like, Frank, we want to meet with you. And I'm like, okay, I thought they wanted to review how well the book did or didn't.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And they're like, we want you to write a memoir. And I was like, what? And I'm like, well, I have the title. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, the moments that made me. Like, I was like, oh, that's what that was about. Like, it was this bizarre thing, you know, and it ended up, not for all kinds of reasons, it wasn't the right title, but what I did was collect the moments that made me. I mean, that is how I wrote this memoir. And that's why it is so kind of vulnerable and brutally honest and revealing, because every one of those moments in this book were significant, for good and bad. Do you know what I mean? Which are true. So that is what I think we all have. Like, I'm doing a To Be Loved summit for part of this, for part of the book launch. And I'm just like, I want everybody to join me in their to be loved story. Like, what is your to be loved story? Like, I want to creating journals, and I want people to have, what is your to be loved story? This is not, again, not Frank's story. This is Frank's story to help you with your story.
I love that. I love that. So let's circle back to writing.
Yes.
And so how would you encourage people to begin writing, or to begin writing about their moments that made them?
Yeah. Like I said, we're working on a journal right now. I'm going to create a journal for people to kind of have for themselves. Writing does access and tap into different things than words do, really does. Just like somatic stuff is different than talking, is different than writing, right?
Right.
Totally different. I healed in a way that I never knew I would be able to through writing. You know, for those people who know Lissa Rankin, her and I did a course a couple months ago called Write to Heal. She's a memoir writer, and it was really fun to collaborate with her. So we kind of created this structure to help people. It's kind of an IFS memoir combined structure, to help people learn how to use this, you know, because I'll say, Tammy, the first time I wrote I wrote a first version as me, and then I rewrote the whole book as Frankie. Okay. So I wrote the whole thing blended. And then
Wow.
I put the two together. And that was so hard to do. Like, I'm in the closet, the hinges are moving on the door. Like, I did the whole book. Like, I wrote two different versions and then I put them together as one. So I want to teach people how to utilize that. Like, sometimes it's important to blend to tell a story. And we don't want the parts to write the book. We want the parts to inform, you know. So there's a process that I learned through writing a memoir that I want to share with people, because
Yeah.
it was powerful for me.
I love that. Can you talk a little bit about just the difference between when I wrote something blended versus when my parts informed me and then I wrote from a self-led place?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it was really, I could just feel it right now. It was really hard to write the whole thing blended, like especially my early trauma history, you know, because I had done a lot of work. I had done a lot of unburdenings, you know, and I did relive in a way. I think one of the things I say, and I didn't do this, and this is what I learned, is get permission from all parts before one blends. I didn't do that. And they blended when I was going through the whole story, but make sure everyone's okay with one part taking the pen. Because are all parts on board, right? It can be written from a different place and there can be support around it. And the other thing that I kind of came up with Lissa, and I did, was self-writing a love letter to the part. So once the part tells its story, then self writes a love letter to the part. So it builds that chasm that's been created as a result of trauma. So there's this like writing through blending and then an instant repair. I like to call corrective experience, right? So that was an important piece of the process because writing from blended and then telling it that way, parts tend to recreate what they're wanting to solve. So, you know, there's a way to do it. And I hope I can teach people that way. Lissa and I are going to run the course again. It was super successful. People like more. We're like, okay, sure.
Yeah,
You know, because
that's great.
the other thing is people can't access therapy. Like, therapy is expensive. It's hard to get in, you know. So maybe this is a way to help people who can't afford therapy.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's part of what we're doing, right? With podcasts and books is like, yeah,
100%.
love that. Love it. All right. Before we go, tell me about music and writing the chapters with music titles and so brilliant. Tell me about that.
Well, that was another thing. And I had to push the publisher on this. I was like, yeah, people use like Ralph Waldo Emerson quotes at the beginning of each chapter. And I'm like, not for Frank Anderson. It's not going to be that, because music has been such a huge piece of my healing journey. Like, each one of those songs I played thousands of times, right? And I got through all, like, my playlist, my To Be Loved playlist, you know, people can download my To Be Loved playlist. I want them to create their own To Be Loved playlist, but all of those songs I played over and over again because they touched me and they helped me heal. They really did. Like, tell you this, like To Be Loved, like I was like, oh my God, I just can't wait to connect with Adele around this. Like, like I have a connection, right? But it's like I want her to
Not
see it.
yet. Not yet.
Yeah, not yet, right? And I am banned to play To Be Loved in the house. My family will not let me play that song anymore. They're like, out to the hot tub if you're going to play the damn song, because I've just played over and over again. But music helps us feel. Music helped me access emotion. And yeah, I use music to heal so much throughout my life. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to share that with people and show that as part of the story. So yeah, thank you.
I love it. There's this sort of this extra thing that you're doing. So you have your memoir, which is informative and helpful, but then you're also teaching people here's how you could use writing as a
Yes.
healing tool. And
Right.
then you're saying here's how you can use music as a healing tool. I mean, so these are just like little nuances that are just really helpful that you might not have thought about in that way.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
I love it, Frank. So I'm excited to see you. Do you want to give everybody your website, which I'm sure they can find all this great information at your
Yeah.
website?
Yes. So frankandersonmd.com is the website. My Instagram is frank_andersonmd. That's where I'm probably most active, but I'm certainly on Facebook and TikTok and LinkedIn now. Yeah, so those are the ways to reach me. One other thing I'll say is I just launched the Trauma Institute, which is a new initiative. Like, hello, I launched two companies this year, Tammy. Trauma Informed Media in LA and the Trauma Institute here, which I'm really integrating and synthesizing trauma treatment for the next generation and for the general public. So I've got a lot going on right now in a way that is all part of bringing trauma healing to the world for the general public.
That's amazing. Amazing. How are your boys? How's your husband?
They're great. Everybody's really good. We've got this bike. We just rented a house in LA. We have a bi-coastal life now because I have a company out there. So everybody's a little bit like uncertain. I said, we're not moving. We have two houses now, and we're going to do that for a year just to see how it goes. So we're making this transition very slowly. My oldest is really thriving as a car salesman,
Oh,
doing
wow.
20 years old, doing super well, loves cars, didn't want to go to college, and it's just doing him in a way that feels really good. He feels supported, which I'm grateful for. The
Right.
transgenerational piece was always in my mind, right? And my youngest is like oh my God, an adolescent on the spectrum is something that everyone should experience, because his inability for filtering and his overwhelming hormones are quite an entertaining thing to experience right now. But he's doing super well. We never thought he'd be doing as well as he's doing. So our family's in
Right.
good shape right now. We know it won't always last this way, right?
Yeah, I love that, Frank. It's so good to see you. And I
Thank
always
you.
just enjoy hanging out with you. So thanks for this.
Yeah.
Thanks for this book, To Be Loved. And yeah, everybody go get it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate what you do for our community.
Thanks.